Regigigas, a giant reborn after its defeat by Arceus. In ancient times, it tore apart the world and reshaped it. It was even worshipped and loved by many people, seen as a great Pokemon and legend throughout the world, only to then be betrayed by those same people. Suddenly, Regigigas and its children were seen as a threat, and the world moved to strike them down and seal them away. But what could have caused the world to turn their backs on these giants? Why were they worshipped in the first place, and why was Regigigas locked behind a door, with the keys being the plates of Arceus? Howdy there, I'm Krillic. Connecting the world through Pokemon, Regigigas has always been a colossal mystery, which is no surprise, it is literally called the Colossal Pokemon after all. It is one of my personal favorites, with tons of in-world lore that's inspired by real-world events and myths. To start us off, the Pokédex says, apparently, it stands at only 12 foot 2 inches, or 3.7 meters, but what if I told you it was much larger in the past, much stronger, much more intimidating before it used up all of its energy and was eventually sealed away by humanity? Regigigas has existed on the world of Pokemon since before humans were ever a thing, maybe even living longer than most Pokemon that are around in the modern day. We can say this because Regigigas moved the continents to where they are now in the modern day. This would mean it has existed since the equivalent of before even Pangea of our world. In fact, there's a very good chance that Regigigas moved the continents while being under the command of Arceus, especially since there's an entire region called the Ronce region to look at within the spin-off game Pokemon Conquest. This is definitely a supercontinent of the past that is also in the shape of Arceus, which is a bit vain, but, you know, gods in myth and history are often described as being vain, so what can you do? Here in Ronce, though, we find a number of different people from different backgrounds. Looking at the map, we can even divide it region by region into a number of the modern-day regions we're aware of, from Kanto to Unova. Even the legendary dragons Reshiram and Zekrom are in this story under the power of Nobunaga, but that's a story for a different day. It gets a little complicated. Though even if we don't consider this canon, there's an interesting detail in our own history we might consider. The oldest known supercontinent, It existed an estimated 3 billion years ago during the Archean period. An interesting little coincidence there, don't you think? Archean and Arceus? It's no secret that Pokemon takes their own twist on the history of our world overall, and this might be where it all begins. From the moment Regigigas was planted onto the Earth, it was meant to do as its dex stated. As with its incredible might, it towed the continents with ropes that it made itself. There's no telling how many times it did this. Maybe it pulled these continents apart and back together multiple times in history. But here's the problem. How is a creature only about 4 meters tall towing entire continents? Aren't there thousands upon thousands of meters of ocean depths to fall into? And that's when we look not at Sinnoh for our answer, but rather Galar for our answer to how big Regigigas may have originally been. In the anime, we watch Ash, Go, Blue, and the rest of their team gather all 5 of the currently known Regis after some intense fights. In doing so, they watch as the skies open up and Dynamax Regigigas appears, intimidating, massive, colossal in size, woken up from its slumber, and they do nothing with it in the anime. Nothing whatsoever. There's no follow-up. But this is also exactly how we get Regigigas in Galar ourselves in the games, allowing us to enter its max raid within the giant's bed. That naming is not a coincidence. This is literally where Regigigas has been resting, sleeping even. To the east, we find the Giant's Foot, and to the south, we'll find Balamir Lake. All of this relates back to one of Regigigas' inspirations, the Daidarabochi. From trusted friends over at yokai.com, they say, Daidarabochi are so large that their movements shape the world. They build mountains by piling up rocks and dirt. They even pick up and move mountains to other places. When they walk, they leave lakes and valleys behind in their footprints. Because of this, many places across Japan are believed to have been made by Daidarabochi. Some are even named after them. And here in Pokemon, we have that legend brought to life in full effect. This means that Regigigas was once much larger than we see it in the modern day, its footsteps capable of carving chunks out of the ground so large that they would eventually become lakes, supporting entire ecosystems and even entire civilizations that settle near them. This becomes a lot easier in an age where the continents were once connected, making its marks on each continent before separating them into what they are today. Maybe it even planted its feet down, and that's where the lakes have newly presented themselves, as it then pulled the continents, its feet grinding into the ground. Though this isn't to say that Regigigas was Dynamaxed in the past, despite that sounding really cool, especially if we can get a G-Max version of it. This is to say that Regigigas once had so much power that it simply was that large enough to walk across the oceans of the world and tow the continents without falling through the cracks, through the ravines that lead to the very bottom of the trenches. As we see it throughout Pokemon, we have plenty of events where Pokemon filled with incredible power have become giants. Alpha Pokemon, Rogue Mega Pokemon, Totems, and Titans. They all have so much power inside of them that they simply grow larger. The same could be said about any other Pokemon, including legendaries, as we do get to see. But once they use up this power, they become smaller and smaller, something we see with Titan and Rogue Mega Pokemon as well. So once again, a much larger Regigigas towed the continents in the past, its legend being known throughout the entire world according to the Pokédex. And as it traveled, ancient humans would eventually come into existence to witness this, and it is in front of these people that Regigigas would create 5 Pokemon that we know of. Regice, Regirock, Registeel, Regieleki, and Regidrago. I don't have all of them here, and I don't have Regigigas. Bear with me. But the 5 Regis that we know of so far, each of the original 3 being composed in its own image from the special Ice Mountain, Rock, and Magma as per the Pokédex. And we know exactly where these Pokemon were created, being the only places where we can find Regigigas before we summon it in Galar in the modern day. Regice was created on the mountains of Sinnoh, specifically Mount Coronet. This mountain divides the continent in half as it extends north to south. This is an incredibly special mountain, being seen as a divine location for good reason and lore. The sheer amount of spiritual energy here transforms Typhlosion into its Hisuian form. It is also the same place where we first meet the Trio of Myth, and of course, this is the same place where we can play the Azure Flute to open the stairway to heaven, leading us into Arceus' realm. In our world, this place would be partially inspired by Mount Asahi, a location that would also be known as the Playground of the Gods, showing just how significant this place is altogether. Also, it's a pretty dope name, the Playground of the Gods. Of course, then, though, a place like this covered in snow year-round would be the best place to gather snow to create life. With the power of Regigigas' signature move, Crushed Claw, it would turn snow to ice, compressing it more and more to form Regice. Alternatively, you might argue that there is a perfectly good giant piece of ice left behind by the old noble Avalugg that was once here. If we go with this theory instead, then we run into one major issue. Regigigas was already sealed away in the basement of Snowpoint Temple, a place that bears statues modeled after the original 3 Regis and needing the corresponding plates of Arceus to unlock Regigigas' prison. We'll come back to this imprisonment later. For now, let's move on to where Registeel was created, Twist Mountain. This place is described as having a reputation for containing incredibly valuable ore, and this is also a place where we find Cryogonal hiding within the caves. To even get close to unlocking Regigigas, you need to unlock Regice by going to the Iceberg Ruins with a Cryogonal leading your party. Sunken in the side of Snowslide Slope lies a temple where the giant of ice sleeps. On the temple's door are strange words. Walk together with a living crystal of snow. When I took a Cryogonal from its Pokeball and had it walk with me, the door opened, and I found Regice. This is absolutely not a coincidence, and we can then easily claim that this mountain full of precious ores with this connection is where Registeel was made, giving it its significance in unlocking Regigigas in Galar. You might even be able to claim that Regirock was made here as well. After all, it is composed of a number of random rocks kind of just crushed together. It's actually pretty funny, because Regi Ice is pure, never-melting ice. Regi Steel is of a valuable metal not found on this planet, despite Regigigas' description saying it made it from magma. And then Regi Rock is just a pile of random living rocks. Not even special rocks, since if it ever breaks, it could just take one rock, plop it back to itself, and it heals. But there's another location where we can naturally encounter Regigigas, and that's in the island cave of Hoenn, but only after you've captured each of the original 3 Regis, Regi Ice being first to appear in this cave before Regigigas can arrive. Likely just to keep Regigigas happy and asleep, as every place we visit, every place we see it in, is covered in snow. This leads us to a new question you may have been asking this entire time. Was Regigigas only sealed away once? We find Regigigas in multiple locations, but it is only ever sealed away in one of them. When we find it at Twist Mountain, the Island Cave, and in Galar, it wakes up once we've brought all of the Regis to its location, revealing to us that it was never a statue, but rather a living creature of colossal size. The only location that Regigigas is sealed away in is Snowpoint's temple. Even then, it was only sealed away during the time in which Sinnoh was once known as Hisui, a time when the Snow Temple stood 6 stories tall rather than being a location with 5 sub-level basements. Clearly, time was not kind to the temple, yet Regigigas would continue to return here in the future to rest. When we look at this temple within Pokemon Legends Arceus, there's a number of details that are incredibly odd. First is that this temple even exists in the first place. Clearly, it was originally meant to be a sign of reverence, a symbol of worship for Regigigas, Regi Ice, Regi Rock, and Regi Steel together. There's a thing within Pokemon where the legendaries or mythical events or something incredibly special always happens on top of a mountain. These places are seen as incredibly sacred locations throughout the history of Pokemon, and a lot of the time this actually blends in with real life, and the belief that the higher up you are, the closer you are to space, and therefore the closer you are to the heavens. This is why we're able to reach out to Arceus at the top of Mount Coronet, a place that is the highest point within the entirety of the region, the closest place to the heavens, and yet here we are with Regigigas sitting within a temple designed for it and the children that it created on top of a mountain, a clear sign of worship within this world. As stated before, there are statues that look similar to our Regis that bear symbols for ice, rock, and steel, allowing us to solve puzzles that lead us through locked doors and higher up the temple until we reach the very top. And outside of this temple, we see 4 patterns on the pillars that are very clearly in reference to the faces of the Regis and their braille, but only one of these formations come even close to representing them, while the other 3 are vastly different to every single Regi, which this doesn't make any sense. Why would they make statues intricately representing the original 3, but have different patterns on the pillars outside? They don't even match the Regieleki or Regidrago we'd eventually learn about. A reasonable explanation is that Regigigas made more Regis in its image long ago, or at least tried to. Whether they came to life in the first place or not is something we have 0 hints of, but for this reason and a slew of other reasons, we may know why Regigigas was sealed away and who would have done it. Regigigas was once worshipped for its immense power. Within the anime, they actually give it credit alongside the rest of the Regis in saving Snowpoint Village long ago when a volcano erupted. The crater that would soon be left afterwards would become Snowpoint Temple in its honor. And another real-life inspiration for Regigigas was Omitsunu, a great Shinto spirit from the land-pulling myth. The land-pulling myth narrates how one of the local deities looks across the Japan Sea and decides to pull land from 4 of the places that he can see, including from the Korean peninsula. This land he cuts off, pulls across the sea, and attaches to Izumo, hence making the province larger. The reason why the district is called U is that the Honorable Yatsukamizu Omitsuno, who performed the land pulling, said, "The country Izumo, of the many clouds rising, is a land like a pile of narrow cloth. First the land was made small, therefore it ought to be sown larger." He looked towards the Cape of Scylla, of the white night dress, to see if there was land in excess. "Land is in excess," he said. He took a hoe, shaped like the chest of a young girl, and thrust it into the gills of the big fish. He tore off the land just like the ears of waving silver grass are torn off when shaken. He lashed a 3-ply rope around the land, and, Frosty Kurokazura, he heaved, like a riverboat. Slowly, the land came. The land he had pulled, he sewed on to where Kozu ends, and it became Kizuki Cape of the many-eared rice. The firmly erected post he moored the land to is what forms the border between Iwami Province and Izumo Province, named Sahime Mountain. Furthermore, the rope he held to pull the land became Sono Long Beach. This myth goes on, but can be seen as an interpretation of the centralization of government in opposition to detached groups worshipping their own gods, as that central government would try to pull them in and have control over them. Something, as you would expect, would cause immense conflict. And that should sound incredibly familiar to you, because that is exactly what we get when we look at the Diamond and Pearl clans within Hisui. Though instead of fighting against centralized government as we see in real life, they made peace through help of the non-religious centralized Galaxy Expedition team commanded by Kamado. They even realized that their worshipped god of choice by the end of the game was not the one true Arceus they thought it was all along. This wouldn't be the only time that this happened in history. This would just be one of the most current events. In fact, we may have helped centralize worship to Arceus through our efforts, taking it away from Dialga and Palkia. Before that, it may have been the Lake Trio, and then before that, it would have been Regigigas. This is once again reflected through real-life history. The land-seeding myth presented in the central mythology, both in Kojiki and Nihon Shoki, basically relates how the heavenly gods dispatch emissaries down to Earth 3 times in order to persuade Okuni Nushi, the divine ruler of the land, to cede his domains to the heavenly gods. The first 2 gods sent off in this way betray the heavenly gods and side with Okuni Nushi. However, the 3rd time, 2 gods are sent down together, and they successfully accomplish their assignment. Instead of getting all these different gods and maybe all these separate events, we might even be able to say instead that Regigigas was the first sent down, while the Lake Trio, as a singular unit, were the second god, quote-unquote, set down. Not only are the Lake Trio known in direct translation as the Lake Gods, but what supports this further is that all 3 of the Lake Trio, Nesprit, Uxie, and Azelf, all were born from a singular egg that they all were contained within. They also granted humanity gifts of emotion, knowledge, and willpower, while Regigigas granted the lands themselves to humanity. We may not get a full betrayal of Arceus for the humans, but we do get some level of them choosing the humans and supporting them. And so the final 2 gods sent down would be Dialga and Palkia, representatives of Arceus, especially in their origin forms. After all, we also know that the Sinjo people who were there before the Diamond and Pearl clans did in fact worship Arceus, though it is when these 2 clans arrived that this worship was twisted to instead be about Dialga and Palkia. We know that the native people of Hisui were aware of these 2, in addition to Giratina, because they were the ones that built their statues, though eventually Giratina would be seen as a threat for its rampage during the time of the Diamond and Pearl clans taking over, and after its defeat, its statue would be destroyed. Nothing but a pedestal and its feet left behind. But that is something I'll have to save in depth for a different video. Instead, let's back up to Regigigas again, a Pokemon that was revered for its power, for what it had done for the people, and yet it was still locked away. This was not the direct work of Arceus, not that we can figure out here. Otherwise, it would have sealed away our colossal Pokemon again and again every single time that it was released. No, instead, this was the work of a kingdom that feared a power much stronger than they were. Pokemon would eventually grow to be partners of mankind, but as mankind watched Regigigas at work, they grew to fear its power. As we know it, it doesn't matter if we catch any of the Regis, it doesn't matter if they become our best friends and we go out for ice cream every Saturday. Regigigas maintains perfect control over them while completely outclassing them in power. Even in the anime, we can watch as the original three try to stand up to this Titan, only to be absolutely bodied by its power. We can also watch as even while under the control of trainers, the Regis defect back under the control of Regigigas, making their trainers powerless against them all. This instills fear into the ancient people of the world. Panicked thoughts race through their minds as they assume the worst. What if it goes on a rampage? What if we can't stop it? What if Regigigas decides to rip everything apart? Our kingdoms, our families, our homes. These fears raced through civilizations, and it all came to a head when Regigigas added 2 more children to the world, Regieleki and Regidrago, though they weren't immediately feared. In fact, Regieleki was also once worshipped by the people of Galar long ago, in a time when its power wasn't weakened and bound by the insulating blue bands that we see on its body in the modern day. Unfortunately, some sort of event occurred in which Regieleki began to torment the public, and they began fearing it, thus resulting in humanity turning their backs on it, binding it, and sealing it away. In the same era, we would find a similar story for Regidrago. It too was worshipped, but people began fearing its power, realizing that it was made of pure draconic energy and already bears the most powerful dragon moves in the entire world while being incomplete. This was just the head of the massive dragon. What would happen if it were given a complete body? Would it destroy the kingdom as we find in tales of dragons long ago? These fears were likely compounded by the darkest day of Galar, the great dragon of the sky that blotted out said sky, assuming this happened before the Regis were worshipped. Which does lead me to another theory within this, that may tie everything together. If the kingdom hid Zacian and Zamazenta and the majority of Galar's history as they wanted to portray themselves, the royals, as heroes, then who's to say they didn't feed into the fears of the public? Who is to say that Galar wasn't actually the first to betray Regigigas? This would be a twist of the classic fairy tale, something Pokemon loves to do with its stories, the story in which the dragon was a feared being that would destroy the entire kingdom. Instead, the dragon would be the one to set the kingdom's people free from the lies and the terror of their monarchy. We often question why Chairman Rose didn't just capture Regieleki for his goal in solving Galar's energy crisis, and we sit here now wondering why worship suddenly turned into fear, why people even know the torment of the Regis, why they know Regigigas can take back control of the other Regis. And it's all because they experienced it and they have seen or at least heard the tales told by the old Galar royals. They have their hands in other regions as we know it. In Hisui, we see a Galarian wheezing smokestack, with Professor Laventon himself likely being from Galar as well. This era in specific would line up with the end of the Edo period and the beginning of the Meiji Restoration, the same point in time where Ezo would turn into Hokkaido, reflected by Hisui being renamed to Sinnoh, the fight of the centralized government over religion, and industrialization of the UK, United States, and Japan, reflected in part by Galar, Unova, and Sinnoh, with Hoenn actually. These same places where we find Regigigas, making a perfect connection. So, Galar's involvement for clarity goes as follows. They knew of Regigigas, of its great deeds and its great power. They wanted it for themselves, as you would expect of any corrupt group of humans would. They wanted to control this Titan completely. They tried to, and they failed. The rest of the Regis came to Regigigas' rescue then. After all, ever since Regigigas was revealed, the rest of the Regis have always been available in the same region in order to awaken this Titan. They threatened Regigigas while it worked on its greatest creation, Regidrago, and unfortunately it would run out of material and need to leave to gather more. And in that time, Regice, Regirock, and Registeel would travel with it, accompanying it to help protect it while leaving the incredibly powerful Regieleki behind with Regidrago, only the head of which alive to defend themselves within Galar. Regieleki would torment humanity, not knowing the difference between friend and foe, those that would attack it and those that would worship it, and eventually propaganda from the Galarian royals would do more than erase the existence of Zacian and Zamazenta. It would brainwash the people into believing that they should fear these last two Regis, that despite there being an entire temple dedicated to their existence, the split decision ruins, Galarians would bind Regieleki and push both of them into imprisonment. With their influence, the royals, they would force Unova, Sinnoh, and Hoenn to follow suit, or at least lie to them, talking of the horrors that the Regis presented within Galar, with the hopes that they could prevent Regigigas from ever coming back. And it worked. No longer were these giants free to one day take their throne. Regidrago would never be completed, and after all, each of the Regis are, at least in their own name, royals of their own right, having Regis as part of their names. We could then read this as King Gigas, Rock King, Ice King, so on and so forth. They were royal threats to the royal lineage, but not anymore. Regigigas would be sealed away in Snowpoint, Regieleki and Regidrago in split decision, but what about Regice, Regirock, and Registeel? Well, Regirock would be sealed away in Hoenn's Desert Ruins or Rock Peak Ruins within Sinnoh and Galar. Regice would be sealed away in Hoenn's Island Cave or within the Iceberg Ruins of Sinnoh and Galar. Meanwhile, Registeel would be sealed within the ancient tomb of Hoenn and the Iron Ruins of Sinnoh and Galar. Strange then that Hoenn would be the outlier every single time in terms of names, though this isn't to say that they weren't worshipped. In fact, when we look at the other two locations, we see statues of them, or at least of the generic golem we keep finding. But once again, these statues serve as more than just worship, but also as a warning, something to tell people of the dangers that they're approaching. Even outside of these locations, on routes next to them, we find Absol consistently. And just in case you are unaware, Absol is the Omen Pokemon, but while many people saw it as the Pokemon that brought disasters, it was actually the Pokemon that would appear to warn everyone of the danger that they're in. They're all over the world, always just outside of the homes of legendary Pokemon. Even in Unova, for example, we find them on the route next to the Giant Chasm, the same place that holds Kyurem. This, though, is when things become complicated, because why would Absol warn everyone of the Regis if they were wronged by humanity? There's a common trope with Regigigas that any time it is woken up against its will, it seems to go on a rampage. This happens when Team Rocket disturbs its rest after it helped save the day in Giratina and the Sky Warrior movie, and it happens again in the animated series. Here we even get to see a devout follower of Regigigas, knowing its legends and even her clothing matching the colors of it thematically, and even doing something we see time and time again with legendary Pokemon in the series animated. She effectively prays to it, trying to appeal to its emotions, and after Brandon sacrifices himself for Regigigas, this works. Its rage quelled, realizing which humans are bad and which ones aren't. And this exact theme is played out elsewhere, as with no other Regi to look at, we have no choice but to look back at Regieleki once again. It is the only one of the Regis to state that it terrorized others, as we've discussed. Meanwhile, the rest were sealed away due to people fearing their power. Regieleki is one of the fastest Pokemon in existence in lore, and currently in terms of stats, it has the highest base speed of all Pokemon. It also has a very interesting move called Thunder Cage, something that of course imprisons the enemy and continues to damage them over time after an initial massive shock. This is a perfect pairing for the incredibly slow Regidrago, who could then take the time it needs to aim and fire its signature move, Dragon Energy, a pure energy attack that unleashes power using its own health. And considering it has the powers of every dragon Pokemon, this wouldn't be the only dangerous move in its arsenal. This may be what they did to quote-unquote terrorize the people of Galar. Anytime people got too close, they attacked. Anytime boundaries were crossed, there was no conversation to be had, no negotiations, it was battle on sight. The original Reggie trio does this as well within the Mystery of Mew movie. With Ash and the gang exploring the tree, the Regis act as guards, or the killer T-cells of the tree, arriving on scene, and with no chance to talk, they begin blasting away at everyone that's there, with intent to kill. Of course, this was partially justified just because pieces of the tree were being taken away, but to see them violently attack everything was insane, and really makes you realize that this could have happened anywhere else. Even when the story ends, unlike any other Pokemon, the Regis simply turn and walk away. No emotion, no talking, no warm interaction, they just fade into the background. The Regis aren't conversationalists, they're royal guards to Regigigas and anything it deems valuable. This is why they're all needed in order to wake it up, and another reason why it controls them. There might not be a specific event that made people see how dangerous they really are. All the Galarian Royals needed was one attack from Regieleki, and then for the world to think about every time they've seen the power of these golems in action. How they destroy everything in their path in such a terrifying way. Not with rage, not with any emotion, just a cold, uncaring, calculated level of destruction. Now, of course, who would I be to cover a theory like this without mentioning that Arceus may have had a hand in all of this, all thanks to the knowledge we get from the Flame Plate. The power of defeated giants infuses this plate. Make no mistake, Regigigas and Arceus were both introduced in Generation 4, both bearing white and gold motif coloring. The only difference is that Regigigas has grown a couple of bushes on its shoulders from staying still for so long. So then, with knowing defeated giants power the plates and Regigigas is our colossal Pokemon, we have to ask, did Arceus orchestrate all of this? Well, yes and no. There's a lot of scrapped lore that gets into the giants being defeated and their bodies being repurposed for Arceus' war against them, but I won't get into all of that here. If you want that, I have a playlist dedicated to it and the Age of Giants and the Secret War. Instead, I want to take a very interesting quote from Adamant that supports some of the scrapped lore not exactly being scrapped anymore. That the giants born when Arceus came into existence wanted to return back to primordial chaos, to a world without order, and each of these giants were born from a different planet. Our planet bearing Regigigas, as Adamant states after our battle with Regigigas. Now that was one solid Pokemon, like a giant born of the very earth. If Regigigas was one of those original giants, then how could it be born of our planet and not be a danger? Well, it's simple. Regigigas has been planted and reborn. Additional lore found in the Kanalov library in canon lore, though it's through Keyscam on Medium that I was able to learn of this, and the original direct translations that state how Regigigas may have been pulled from deep down in the earth by the Lake Guardians. 3 Pokemon there were. They held their breath, remaining in that state. They dove deeper and deeper into the lakes. They dove deeper and deeper despite the pain. And from the bottom of the lakes, they fetched an important thing that is said to serve as the power for making the lands. The way the text is used is as though this thing is not a power, but something that holds the power, something that possesses it, not just contains it, and Keyscam says it perfectly as follows. In short, the text is saying the purpose of this thing and the power it possesses are to make lands, with the verb tense telling us this remains true at the time the myth was written. Make can refer both to an act of creation or to making things with pre-existing materials. For example, it can be used as a reference for the construction of a building or the cooking of a meal. Then, the mysterious object has either the power to generate lands from nothing or to rearrange them to create something new. And one creature fits perfectly that profile, Regigigas. Through this connection, he continues. If Regigigas is indeed a creature born out of the planet's land, the implication may be the Lake Trio, in their act of painful submerging, quote-unquote, impregnated the earth with their spirit, resulting in the Colossus's birth. During the Sinjo event in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, Cynthia even hints to the planet being a gargantuan egg of some sort. Indeed, the image of Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf traversing the waters deeper and deeper, slowly approaching the Earth's core, is already quite reminiscent of sperm cells fecundating an egg. An egg is the cradle of every being. The planet itself is an egg in a sense. Life that comes from an egg will come to an end in due course, to begin anew. That may be what Arceus wanted to show us. Regigigas was born anew. A giant that was defeated long ago, encased and buried within the planet, repurposed in mind, body, and spirit to serve Arceus in its wishes. It was cursed with its ability Slow Start, something to help prevent it from overthrowing Arceus if it remembered its past life and chose to try to overthrow it again in the new age. Though once those wishes were complete, Regigigas decided to follow its original programming before its rebirth, and it created the 5 Regis that we know of today, potentially even more throughout the rest of the world, not just in its own image, but in the image of the lost giants that once were, the ones that were defeated by Arceus and their powers infused into the plates. They would, at least in the modern age, be completely subservient to Regigigas, likely as they were before their original defeat. And while they don't serve as a threat in the modern age, Arceus would continue to keep an eye on them. After all, it seems like too much of a coincidence that it would still be sealed away before the time of Hisui, alluding to the idea that maybe even those that worshipped Arceus may have had a hand in this, but they likely did this to keep everyone safe. After all, Regigigas is no joke. Once it breaks free of Slow Start, it becomes a terror unlike any other. Those that knew the truth likely knew what had to be done, that they had to seal it away for the safety of those that would listen to such a foolish king in Galar. And this is why we find Regigigas locked behind a door where the only keys are the plates of Arceus, something that only powerful, worthy, and compassionate individuals would be able to earn. A locked door that protected society and Regigigas, especially as it wasn't even tied up in that basement. It had instead a massively open room and only woke up when we opened those doors, prepared to fight when we approached it. In conclusion, I believe Regigigas truly is a reborn giant of old lore. It tore apart the world and reshaped it as per Arceus' command. It was worshipped and loved by many, seen as a great Pokemon in legend throughout the world. But over time, the Galarian monarchy would see the Regis as a threat, as a false royal family in their own right, and move to strike them down and seal them away with their influence over others. The Regis would defend themselves, but one day they would be separated and sealed away far from each other. One by one, they were given temples of their own and sealed away for the safety of humanity and themselves. Strong trainers to unlock the 5 children. Those 5 children then being the key to awaken Regigigas in the modern day, and 3 plates of Arceus to unlock its door within the Snowpoint Temple in Hisui. Now the Giant King has been unleashed upon the world with its kingly children, but they serve not as a danger. They just wait until the day when they're useful once more and can serve their purpose to the world and Arceus itself. And that concludes our story for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, make sure you subscribe because there are plenty of deep dives just like this on this channel. Also want to thank members of the channel that you see on the screen now. Their support ensures I can take the time necessary to make quality content for everyone. And if you would like to go the extra mile and get behind the scenes content, early access to videos, and members exclusive videos, become a member for as little as $3 a month. There's a list of them already, and members just voted on the next members exclusive video. Pokemon that canonically hate humanity, with little Baneri being one of them. This is not a joke, by the way, but you'd have to watch the video to find out why when it comes out. Let me know also your favorite Regi, and if you think there's other details proving or disproving this theory. I've been itching to make this one for a very long time, and I'm happy I could pull these details together for you. I love also reading your comments, plus they appease the almighty algorithm alongside likes, sharing the video, and hyping the video. Lastly, one of my favorite comments from this past week was from Rex Dolar on my video ranking mythical Pokemon as pets, saying Victini would be the perfect pet for me. I'm a trained pastry chef, and macarons are one of my favorite things to make. Have all the macarons you want, little buddy, and a little smiley face at the end. It's just always fun, and if you want to see where I rank your favorites for mythicals or even legendary Pokemon, as I have 2 videos separately on that, check that video out. But that is all for today, and as always, thank you so much for watching. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. Don't do anything I would do. Please be nice to each other. I love you, and I will see you next time.